You pull out your smartphone, tap the screen, and, 15 minutes later, a week's worth of groceries is just sitting on your porch.
Right. It feels totally frictionless.
Completely frictionless. But beneath that one simple screen tap, you're actually triggering this massive high-speed game of Tetris. Except the blocks weigh 40,000 pounds, and they're moving at 60 miles an hour.
Yeah. And the board they're playing on, which is our electrical grid and physical infrastructure, I mean, it was built decades before anyone even dreamed of a 15-minute delivery window.
Exactly.
We're essentially asking a 100-year-old power grid, which was designed for, slow, predictable residential loads, to suddenly act like a high-speed fiber optic network, just delivering these massive spikes of energy on demand.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to explore that exact collision, the clash between our obsession with instant delivery and the rigid physical limits of our infrastructure.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. We're looking at the invisible mechanisms moving goods today. So the predictive AI routing fleet traffic, the really messy reality of transitioning those massive fleets to electric power, and the, frankly, wild workarounds companies are inventing when the traditional power grid simply runs out of juice.
The central conflict here is basically speed versus mass. We've optimized the digital side of logistics so thoroughly that the primary bottlenecks are now, entirely physical.
Right.
It's just a fascinating look at what happens when software finally hits the hard wall of thermodynamics and urban zoning.
So let's start with the sheer scale of the digital side, because the demand driving this ecosystem is almost difficult to wrap your head around.
Oh, absolutely.
Looking at the 2034 market report on-demand delivery, the global market is compounding at 14.1% annually. We're talking about a trajectory from roughly $342.8 billion in 2025 to over $1.1 trillion by 2034.
$1 trillion. That's just wild.
Yeah, right. And that shift is largely driven by a massive pivot. So away from just standard food delivery, which is still about 38.4% of the market, and into hyper-growth sectors like grocery and healthcare logistics, which are growing at like 17 and 18%.
And I mean, the behavioral data behind that $1 trillion projection is really the key.
Yeah.
When you have nearly 6.9 billion active smartphone subscriptions globally, consumer expectations don't just evolve, they mutate.
Yeah, the threshold for patience has just evaporated.
Exactly. You have this entire demographic, particularly that 18 to 35 cohort, and 74% of them are actively prioritizing delivery velocity over cost savings. They will literally pay a premium just to shave a few minutes off an arrival time.
Which is wild to think about. But to physically manifest that kind of speed, the industry had to completely rethink warehousing. Which brings us to the dark store revolution.
Right, the micro-fulfillment center.
Yeah, we've moved away from those massive, million-square-foot distribution centers way out on the outskirts of towns. Instead, logistics companies are carving out these tiny nodes right in the middle of dense residential neighborhoods.
And getting those delivery windows down to 10 to 15 minutes, which actually cuts per order delivery costs by about 18 to 23%.
But the real magic isn't the real estate, is it? It's the predictive staging.
Oh, the staging mechanisms are incredible. These aren't just scaled-down grocery stores. They are purely data-driven distribution nodes. The AI algorithms running a dark store ingest, local weather data, historical purchase velocity, neighborhood demographics, all of it.
Wow.
Yeah, to run these complex stochastic models, the system doesn't wait for you to order milk. It predicts with a high degree of certainty that your specific zip code will need, say, 400 gallons of milk between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday.
That is insane.
And it pre-positions that inventory beforehand.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because staging milk in a neighborhood node is one thing, right? But how does this level of algorithmic intelligence scale up to the heavy-duty freight?
That's a great question.
Because keeping those dark stores stocked requires massive 18-wheelers moving across state lines. And you can't just pre-position an entire semi-truck on a whim.
Right. What's fascinating here is how we apply dynamic optimization to what the industry calls empty miles, or deadhead miles.
Right, trucks just driving empty.
Exactly. For decades, the Achilles heel of commercial trucking has been that up to 20% of truck miles are driven completely empty.
Wow, 20%.
Yeah. Finding a return load used to involve a human broker literally calling around to warehouses on the phone. It was a massive drag on profitability and, terrible for carbon footprints.
Just burning diesel to move absolutely nothing but air.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now, AI freight matching platforms, companies like LoadSmart, FourKites, Project 44, Transfix, Flock Freight, they treat the entire supply chain as a real-time math problem.
So they replace the human broker entirely.
Right. The algorithms evaluate millions of permutations in milliseconds. They factor in real-time traffic, weather patterns, cargo type, and they dynamically string together complex routes. It saves fuel and drastically reduces those empty miles.
So the routing is becoming basically digitally flawless. We are squeezing every possible ounce of efficiency out of the logistics network,
We are.
but that digital efficiency eventually hits a hard physical limit. Because even with perfect AI-optimized routing, a diesel engine still burns diesel.
It does.
And that forces us to look at the massive, really messy transition to electric medium and heavy-duty vehicles, or MHDVs.
Which is arguably the most complex industrial pivot of our time.
Yeah.
When you dig into the 2025 Ecosystem Gap Analysis from Electric Mobility Canada, or EMC, the sheer volume of structural barriers is daunting.
Yeah, they identified, what, 52 distinct gaps?
Exactly. 52 gaps across 4 pillars: planning, vehicles, charging infrastructure, and operations. But the foundational issue, the absolute top gap that stops fleet managers in their tracks, is reaching TCO parity, total cost of ownership.
Right, because the upfront capital expenditure for a heavy-duty EV is just staggering compared to a legacy internal combustion engine.
It's a huge difference. You might save money on electricity versus diesel over a 10-year lifespan, sure. But securing the initial financing for a multi-million-dollar fleet overhaul requires long-term economic certainty.
Which most logistics companies just don't have.
Exactly. That's why the EMC report stresses the need for predictable, decades-long government incentive structures, like the IMHZEV and ZETF programs in Canada. They also push for a national strategy with phased-in sales targets just to secure vehicle supply from manufacturers.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Reading through these sources, there's a huge structural real estate problem. Fleet operators often lease their operating space.
Yeah, usually on like 3 to 5 year commercial leases.
Right. It's like buying an insanely expensive electric toothbrush, but your landlord strictly forbids you from using the bathroom outlet to plug it in.
That is a perfect way to put it. The capital depreciation models completely fail in that scenario. Installing a commercial-grade electrical substation and trenching conduits through a parking lot is a massive sunk cost.
You can't just dig up the concrete and take the grid connection with you when your lease is up in 36 months.
No, you can't. And that's why businesses hesitate to sink capital into permanent charging infrastructure on leased land. It's also why the EMC report advocates for modular infrastructure, pre-installed conduits, and these new charging-as-a-service models.
Making it an operational expense rather than a capital one.
Exactly.
But deploying that takes time. So fleets can't easily install fixed chargers at their leased depots, and public infrastructure is lagging. What happens when thousands of new EVs hit the road?
You get a crisis. And then you get a really innovative market response.
Miami is the perfect case study for this crisis. That CBS News investigation painted a pretty chaotic picture. You've got EV registrations down there jumping 68%, but the public charging ports only increased by 12%.
A massive disparity.
Huge. And Florida Power and Light, the utility company, their local grids are literally at capacity. Upgrades are costing anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000, with permitting delays stretching 6 to 18 months.
Which is an eternity in logistics. So when the traditional grid fails, the market forces a workaround. We're seeing the rise of mobile EV charging.
Yeah.
Companies like BeeCharged EV are bypassing the grid entirely.
Right. They had massive success in Miami, something like 1,500 charging sessions in just 60 days.
Yeah, with flat pricing of $165 per session, the power just comes directly to the vehicle. It works brilliantly for consumer vehicles and small vans.
But when you scale up to heavy-duty freight, you can't just tow a giant lithium-ion battery behind a pickup truck to charge a semi. The weight penalties make the physics impossible.
Which brings us to a second innovation, L-Charge's new approach for large commercial fleets. It's a fascinating piece of engineering.
Okay, lay it out for us.
They've mounted a 60-kilowatt DC fast charger onto Ford 250 and 550 chassis. But they aren't hauling batteries. They use a power takeoff system, or PTO, that directly taps into the Ford's 7.3-liter gas engine.
Wait.
The mechanical energy of the gas engine spins an alternator to generate the high-voltage DC current for the EV.
Hold on. I have to push back on this. We are using a gas-powered Ford engine to drive around and charge zero-emission vehicles. Isn't that totally defeating the environmental purpose of everything we just talked about?
I know, on the surface, it absolutely sounds counterproductive.
It sounds crazy.
But we have to look at the practical alternatives. First, the L-Charge system can run on renewable natural gas or RNG. And more importantly, unlike older diesel generators that sit there idling and pumping out emissions all day, the PTO system only engages and burns fuel under active load.
So it only burns fuel when it's actively charging the EV.
Exactly. It avoids all those idle emissions. But the real context here is the timeline. Remember those 18-month utility delays in Miami? Upgrading a commercial electrical substation for massive fleet charging can take 2 to 5 years. A logistics company cannot pause its supply chain for half a decade waiting on the grid. Mobile charging is an essential, pragmatic stopgap. It keeps the fleets running today while we wait for permanent infrastructure tomorrow.
Okay, that makes sense. Whether you're using a multi-million-dollar fixed depot or calling a mobile L-Charge truck, time really is money. Fleet managers need to understand the actual physics of charging to remain profitable, right?
Absolutely. The learning curve is steep. And the data from Greenlane on commercial operations highlights a massive misconception around what's called state of charge, or SO.
Yeah, it's a common misconception that the charger itself dictates the speed. Like if you plug into a fast charger, you assume you get fast charging the whole time.
Right, but the charger is just a conduit. The vehicle's onboard battery management system, the BMS, is actually the boss. It dynamically controls the energy intake to protect the battery chemistry.
So what does that mean for a fleet manager?
Well, first they have to understand the charging levels. Level 1 charging is useless for commercial trucks. It would literally take a week to charge a 400 kilowatt-hour battery.
Right, nobody has time for that.
Level 2 is great for overnight charging at depots, but DC fast charging and the upcoming megawatt charging system, that's for rapid mid-route turnarounds. And the golden rule for commercial EV fleets using fast chargers is to keep the battery in the 20% to 95% sweet spot.
So it's like electrons are people boarding an empty bus. At first, the bus pulls up empty, the doors open, and it's fast and easy to grab a seat. Everyone rushes on.
I love this analogy.
But when the bus is 95% full, finding that last empty seat takes maneuvering. People are squeezing past each other, and it just slows everything down to a crawl.
That maps perfectly to what's happening inside the battery. The BMS throttles the speed as it fills up. And to add to your analogy, the BMS is also taking the temperature of everyone on the bus. Yeah, pushing high voltage current generates massive heat. If the battery gets too hot or if it's freezing outside, the BMS throttles the speed even more to prevent damage. So fleet managers must integrate this exact complex charge curve data into the AI routing software we discussed in Section 1.
Because if they don't, they end up with costly pit stops.
Exactly. The AI has to time the charging perfectly to minimize downtime.
So what does this all mean? Next time you tap order on your phone for that 15-minute delivery, think about the fragile, hyper-complex ecosystem you're relying on. It's AI load matching, preventing empty miles, it's fleet managers negotiating gridlock with mobile chargers, and it's onboard computers managing battery chemistry down to the degree.
It really is a modern miracle, but it leaves us with a fascinating final thought. As AI gets better at perfectly predicting where every delivery truck will be, and these mobile charging services prove they can effectively deliver power on demand, will the traditional gas station or fixed charging hub become completely obsolete?
Wait, really? You think the whole hub model could disappear?
It's possible. We might be moving toward a future where the grid is entirely decentralized and the power simply comes to you wherever you are. Imagine how that would redraw the entire map of commercial real estate.
That's definitely something to mull over. The physical world is bending to our digital demands in ways we barely notice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.